My name is Elizabeth Dinchell, and I am at the Hoover Presidential Library Museum in West Branch, Iowa. And today we are joined by the National Mall and Memorial Parks, and they will be talking about the Cherry Tree Rebellion, FDR, and the building of the Thomas Jefferson Memorial. With us, we have Jen Rudnick, the education specialist from the National Mall. We have many partners helping us with this group. Internet 2, the Park Service, the Presidential Libraries, Archives, White House Historical Association. Great group of partners.
So I'm Jen, and I would like to introduce my friend and coworker here, Ranger Brad.
Hello.
And we're glad to be with all of you today, and excited to share with you a story about our park, the National Mall. Any of you all been to D.C. before?
No.
Okay, well, we're going to take you on a little tour of one of our memorials, sort of, tell you about the history of its building. It's kind of an interesting little story, we think, and so you'll be all prepared and ready for your visit someday to the National Mall, hopefully. Part of Montana are you in? I mean, if I were looking at a map of Montana.
We're going in 2018 as well. Western Montana.
Okay. Very exciting, very exciting.
And we are also planning, we have a class trip. Every few years we go to D.C. This class has the option, quite a few of these students will be going in 2018 of June to D.C.
Oh, very good. Well, we'll have to keep in touch. Maybe we can meet up. That would be really fun.
Oh my gosh.
Awesome.
Some not so distant learning.
Really? Yes,
Yeah.
we'll take the distance out of
Right.
it. Well, cool. So for now, shall we jump in and talk a little Thomas Jefferson?
Let's, Ranger Jen.
Okay, Ranger Brad.
All right. Welcome to our little class we're doing across the great expanse of our wonderful nation here. Welcome to Washington, in a sense. And what Ranger Jen and I want to do is talk about a memorial to neither one of these presidents. Can anyone tell me who one or both of these are?
Hannah. One of them is Theodore Roosevelt. One of them
I'm a trifle deaf.
You got the right last name.
Yeah, I can't.
It's the same thing, Tara.
Don't worry, it happens all the time.
I know, right?
Guys, you have to speak louder.
You have to talk louder.
Is it Franklin Roosevelt?
Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Very
He's
good.
on the right-hand side. Does anyone know who the president on the left-hand side is?
No.
Correct, William Howard Taft. Okay? It's okay, guys.
Yeah.
These two presidents are going to factor very large in what Ranger Jen and I are going to talk about today. Now, these are 2 out of 45 presidents that we've had in the United States of America in our history since George Washington first took the oath in 1789. Can anyone tell me some concerns that presidents might deal with in their day-to-day duties as chief executive of our great country? What entails the job of president? What do you do on a day-to-day basis?
What a timely question as we embark on a new administration.
What did she say?
Sign papers.
Sign papers? Hey, you know what? That's a really good answer, because I guarantee you every day, what does a president do? They sign papers. One way, shape, or form, those papers affect our country, dealing with all kinds of things from, national defense to budgets and on down the line. And one of the things that Ranger Jen and I want to talk about is just that, the way that presidents may put ink to paper and change things or make things, create things. And these two presidents are going to have a lot to do with the story we're about to tell. And with that, we'd like to show you our nifty little title, Presidents and the Park. And the park in question, of course, is National Mall and Memorial Parks, where Ranger Jen and I work. And it's a park that blends not only history but natural aspects. We have very beautiful trees that come into bloom every April that draw many people every year, the flowering Japanese cherry trees, and we have monuments and memorials, Lincoln Memorial, Washington Monument that people like to come to visit when it's open. And we want to tell you a little bit about how our park was formed and how presidents have helped to shape that. Okay, so with that being said, onward and upward. Of course, this is not Washington, D.C., but this, of course, is the way that you want to really unfold any story. If you're trying to tell a story about something, you want to lay good groundwork for it. And to lay good groundwork, you want to kind of go backwards in time a little bit to set the tone or the precedent for things to come. So, Ranger Jen, why don't you tell the kids why we're looking at a waterfall here?
I think I may just turn around and ask them if anybody knows what park this is a picture of.
Yosemite.
Good answer. Very nice. Yes, Yosemite. You could argue, and I think people do, that because park rangers really like to argue about things sometimes, that this is one of the first national parks. Because it is set aside by a president, one that is near and dear to our hearts, and celebrating a birthday this weekend, President Abraham Lincoln. He's going to sign off on protecting Yosemite in the 1860s, not as a national park, but as a to be managed right by the folks in California, but
it's protected land.
Saving it for the people, not making sure we don't end up with hotels and strip malls and things like that all over it. This is the first, one of the early times we see land being protected by a president. And this will continue to another famous place.
Guesses?
Yellowstone.
We had a ranger in my park years ago who used to just refer to them as the Y parks, because they're so big and everybody can recognize them. Yellowstone and Yosemite. Yeah, so most rangers you talk to are going to say that Yellowstone is the first of our national parks, because it's really the first time that land is set aside for the purpose of, by the government for all of the people. And so this is 1872. President Grant would sign off on this. But we're seeing presidents taking a role in creating these special places, and we've seen it through the years. Y'all mentioned Theodore Roosevelt early on. He was someone who would take big advantage of this, up to our most recent former president, who did this quite a bit too and has protected a lot of land for the people.
So this has gone on since Abraham Lincoln in the 1860s, the creation of these spots, which number now 400 and over.
I want to say 17.
Yeah, at least
417.
Yeah, 417 national parks of varied sizes, shapes, and forms. We saw two huge examples right here in the form of what's right before you and Yosemite, to very small places that might be as little as a home. Of someone very important in our nation's past, a battlefield, a scenic river that might stretch across several of our states, and it really accentuates national in the sense of importance and the way that many of these things touch many of our different states of our union. So let's go a little bit further here and kind of break down, because Ranger Jen said 1872 Yellowstone is going to come into formation, but as that's a national park, who watched over the national parks prior to the creation of the National Park Service? Because we didn't come along until 1916. The United States Army is going to administer and look over our national parks and protect them and take care of them for the American people until we come along during the year.
Not us personally.
No, yeah, we don't age quite that well. But yeah. 1916, the National Park Service is created for the sole purpose of taking care of places such as what we just discussed. Now, Ranger Jen, one of her favorite things to do for school programs is to break down what the symbol of the National Park Service represents.
Have you looked at this before? You've seen this image before?
Yeah.
You recognize it?
Yeah, I kind of.
Yeah? on the sleeve. You see it on our signs. Are you all anywhere near Glacier or not really?
Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
2 hours.
Okay. So you're probably familiar with this, and normally I'd love to like pull it apart and talk about all the different pieces, but I'm kind of anxious for us to get to our story of our memorial here. So anybody know the outline and what the shape is? Do you recognize that?
Arrowhead.
The arrowhead. Did you say that already? I tend to say that and then ask the question. But yeah, that reminds us of all of our cultural history, all of the, as Brad mentioned, the battlefields, the historic homes, the places that deal with our history and our culture, the Native American sites in the Southwest, and all of that kind of history. Yeah, Montana. Yeah, Custer's. It's now Little Bighorn.
Little Bighorn. Okay.
Yes. But when I was there, it was called Custer Battlefield. Yes. Anyway, we digress. But a lot of the parks we pointed out deal with natural and scenic beauty, and you see that represented by the mountain and the lake and the trees and the animals. Our biggest animal is maybe squirrels, ducks, geese. Humans. Okay, fine. But yeah, all of the symbols play a part in our logo, and it really represents everything. Any part of our 400 plus national parks can be represented by our symbol. So it's really important to us to make sure young people recognize it and know what it's all about. And so I wanted to go over that really quick. But we have a fun story here that I bet we're going to need some time to tell. So we're going to get to it.
Okay, guys, so we've taken you from an introduction to where we're from, Washington, D.C., to an image of California, to an image of the great American Midwest with Yellowstone. And then we drew you all the way back to the inception of the National Park Service. So now, of course, I'm showing you a picture of Chicago, Illinois. Chicago, Illinois, why is Ranger Brad showing you this particular image right here? Because in 1893, there was a fair known as the Columbian Exposition. They're known as World's Fairs today. And the Columbian Exposition of Chicago had a great effect upon the park in which Ranger Jen and I work, and the city that we work in. When you look at this image right here of this canal drawing down to the building there in the distance and the grand neoclassical style structures along either side of this canal, this really, for me, and for many people that I've talked about this to, and maybe perhaps for yourself, it kind of makes me think of Washington, D.C. And when you think about the way that Washington, D.C. panned out over the years, it's rather remarkable because the author Charles Dickens is going to remark in a visit to Washington, D.C. in the 1840s, he called it a city of magnificent intentions. And let me tell you, when you break down Victorian speak, that is an insult. Basically, what Charles Dickens was saying is, nice try, America. You created a city that has grand pretensions, but it doesn't smack of anything of a grand world capital. It was a backwater of world capitals until this era that we're looking at, the late 19th into the early 20th century. And this image before you, this World's Fair of Chicago, is going to influence the development of Washington, D.C. into the grand city that we know of it today that draws people from all over the world to visit our nation's capital. It's called the City Beautiful movement. Does this look like some place that requires a City Beautiful movement?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Does anyone know where this is?
No.
It's Washington, D.C. In the distance, you can see a couple of buildings that may be very familiar to you today. And once you look very closely at them, you're going to say, oh, yeah, I know that building. See that one in the distance that really kind of sticks out, that dark building right there? That's the old Smithsonian Castle, the first building of the Smithsonian Institution that lines the National Mall, the great museum complex that is one of these draws to Washington, D.C. today. This is the year 1860. So bear that in mind as you're looking off into the distance. You can see something else in the background, right? Let me tell you that looming in the distance, that's the state of Virginia. But what's in between Washington and Virginia is what? The Potomac River. The Potomac River is right next to another building I want you to take attention to. Do you see it there? It's kind of blending into the river itself. Do you see something that looks like a tower back there?
Yeah.
That's the unfinished Washington Monument. And that is one of the reasons that we're going to have people like Charles Dickens in the middle of the 19th century think that Washington, D.C. needs something of a facelift. And in the wake of the American Civil War, we're going to have this facelift. Washington, D.C. is going to change dramatically. From the late 19th century all the way up until the early part of the next century, it's going to start turning into something more like this. Now, what do you think is going to draw more people? The image I showed you before, or something that looks like this?
Something that looks like that.
Fantastic. Exactly. It's very landscaped, manicured landscaping that you see right here. The reflecting pool, the nice tree-lined walkways, these grand memorials such as to our 16th president in the foreground, George Washington's monument there in between that and the seat of our government, the Capitol building. So you can see that over time, grand buildings were made. But there's also something that I mentioned just briefly that I really want to hone in on, natural beauty. Because that's one of the things that was seen as lacking in the development of Washington, D.C., as it started to take shape as a city that would start drawing rather than repelling people from it. The lady in question right here is going to have an awful lot to do with the landscaping of Washington, D.C. Now, she is the wife of one of the presidents you saw at the very beginning of our program. Which president's wife do you think that is? Do you think it's President Roosevelt or President Taft's wife?
Taft.
It's President Taft's wife. Her name's Helen Herron Taft, First Lady of the United States, and she is going to fall absolutely in love with a certain type of tree. And she is not going to be alone. There's a gentleman by the name of Dr. David Fairchild who is involved with the importation of foreign species into the United States. He loves this particular tree. And a lady who writes for the Chicago Tribune who has an awful lot of influence by the name of Eliza Sidmore. They each love flowering Japanese cherry trees. Every spring they become so beautiful with their pink, reddish, and white flowers. And in Japan, it became something of a ritual for people to come out and celebrate the coming of these blossoms in the springtime. For it would also, of course, for many in Japan, signal a beginning to the year, as it were, a beginning to the growing season. And this is going to be a time of, as springtime is known to many, a time of rebirth, when we all kind of shake off the malaise of winter and get into the art of living again. And she wants flowering Japanese cherry trees to decorate Washington, D.C. And in 1909, she is going to make it known that she wants trees to be planted here. Now, you can see the Washington Monument there looming in the distance. And this is along something that used to exist in Washington, D.C., known as, are you ready for it? The Speedway. The Speedway is going to be unveiled as something known as the Tidal Basin takes shape. Land is reclaimed from the Potomac River, creating two huge bodies of land, West and East Potomac Park. And what's going to be done with this is initially they're going to be bodies of land that's going to help Washington stop the bad flooding that had engulfed the city in its early stages of its existence. And when these bodies of land are created, a lot of people want to, create parkland. Ultimately, it's set aside as that. So a speedway is created where people could go out in their horses and carriage and go off at ungodly speeds of 5 to 6 miles per hour. This is going to be right here. If you look closely at this map, see where it says Tidal Reservoir?
Right in the middle.
Right
I
in
want
the
to keep
middle?
pointing, and pointing won't do me any good.
It says Tidal Reservoir.
It's right there.
It's a big body of water there. See it?
Oh, there it is.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, right along the Tidal Reservoir, you see the Speedway. Okay, and you can see how the Speedway goes along these bodies of land that are labeled Potomac Park on either side right there. So the Speedway was created in the wake of these bodies of land being reclaimed from the river, and Mrs. Taft thought that these trees that she loved so much, would be perfectly situated around this speedway because it's open landscape, right for the picking for change.
Picking.
Yeah, right for that. There you go. For changing the face of Washington D.C. So in 1910, the year after Mrs. Taft makes it plain that she would like these trees to appear in Washington D.C., there was a gentleman by the name of Jikichi Takamine. He was a chemist from Japan. He came to the United States. He overheard that Mrs. Taft wanted these trees, and he wanted to donate them. And he is going to wish to donate them. He says, "How would you like me to donate 2,000 trees?" Well, when rumor has it that Dr. Takamine wants to donate these trees, the government of Japan gets involved. And it is going to become, in name, a gift from Tokyo to Washington. And they called themselves sister cities in this agreement. Tokyo was going to gift 2,000 cherry trees to Washington, D.C. to decorate the capital city of the Empire of Liberty, the United States of America. Now, in 1910, the trees arrive. Now, what do you think the fellas in this picture are doing?
Planting trees.
Well, what do you want to do before you put something in the ground? You want to kind of
Digging holes.
Hey, great answer, and that is exactly all truthful. But something else you might want to do, something that comes all the way from a foreign land, things are generally
Hoe it.
Inspected. Yes, inspected. Things are generally inspected before they're actually introduced into the United States fully and completely. And what these fellows are doing, they're checking out the trees. Guess what? They're diseased. Older trees were sent from Japan rather than young saplings. Older trees that were infected with something known as nematodes. Nematodes are growths upon these trees that perhaps if they should be placed in the ground, they might be a bad introduction into the landscape of the United States and might make actually the landscape around Washington, D.C. worse than it formerly was. So the decision is, when all of the government heads of the United States are going to have to make a decision upon this, the President of the United States included, because this is a gift from a foreign country.
It's an awkward situation.
Yeah.
It's like getting a present and it's broken. You don't want to tell somebody that they gave you a bad gift, but you can't use it at the same time.
It's very delicate. So even the Secretary of War, which is now called the Secretary of Defense, is going to be involved because you just don't want to offend Japan by doing something to these trees. Now, they can't use them. So they're going to have to make a really tough decision. What do you think they're going to do with the trees? And let me tell you this. Don't say return them. What do you think they're going to do with these trees?
Burn them.
Not going to take them back to the counter at Walmart.
Burn them?
Yeah. Burn them?
Oh!
Plant them.
Oh, good guess.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I got to tell you, this was my favorite slide that I made for you all. This is actually the case. They burned the trees. And fortunately, the way everything played out, the government of Japan completely sympathized with the reasoning behind this burning of the cherry trees, and they're going to send a subsequent gift. In 1912, they send 3,020 trees. to replace the ones that were burned. Bam, Mrs. Taft plants a tree. Arbor Day, 1912, she and the wife of the Japanese ambassador, the Viscountess Chinda, are going to plant flowering Japanese cherry trees in Washington, D.C. The first and second trees are going to become the first of over 3,000 planted around this, which we know as the Tidal Basin, or formerly the Speedway. Do the ladies in the foreground look like they're enjoying themselves? It's a nice spring day. Yes, they're having fun. This is what people love to do when the cherry trees come out. They like to come out and bask in the glow of these beautiful flowers. Something else I'd like to draw your attention to. Primary source material. We're looking at a little of this right now. A couple of examples. An old photograph. We've looked at a few of those. Those are primary sources. And here, this clipping was taken from the Washington Post. Mrs. Taft plants a tree. Little teeny tiny print. How do you think such an event would be covered today? There'd be satellite trucks all over the place, wouldn't there? There'd be newscasters, and it would be plastered everywhere. You could see it on the internet. You could see it on Fox, CNN, you name it. All over television. But this little article began such a huge phenomenon in the nation's capital that draws so many people to it. So just to show you not only these primary sources, but just how over time things used to be reported to the way they are today. And we're back. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, one of the fellas that we saw at the very first slide, and a much younger image of him. He was the Undersecretary of the Navy during World War I in President Wilson's administration. And when he was in Washington, D.C., he was rather aghast that there was not a monument or a memorial dedicated to our third president. And who might that be?
George Washington. That's the first. Not George Washington.
I heard of John Adams, which I admire.
JFK was
A person.
Thomas Jefferson.
We heard it.
I heard it in the background. Thomas Jefferson, our third president, the creator of the Declaration of Independence. He is going to double the size of our nation with the Louisiana Purchase, amongst many other wonderful things that he did. And President Roosevelt believes that he should have a memorial. He is aghast that there is not one, and he is going to, once he finds himself in office, become the driving force behind the building of a memorial to our third president, Thomas Jefferson. There he is.
That's him.
That is our third president right there, Thomas Jefferson of Virginia. Now, back to our map. Another primary source, an old map of Washington, D.C. As park rangers, Ranger Jen and I, particularly this part of the city, because this encompasses our park, we like to find old maps that show how the area around where we work. Yeah, there used to be a bathing beach down there right where this star is going to pop up, because that is where...
We don't recommend bathing there now, so when you come to visit, don't plan to go bathing out in the Tidal Basin.
Yeah, for a couple of reasons. One, the beach isn't there anymore, and secondly, water is green, and it is site of a very stately monument or memorial, and you conduct yourself in certain ways when you visit the monuments and memorials. And this is something that is very important to President Roosevelt. You all see the star there, right?
Yes.
And as I told you, this body of land, these bodies, I should say, of land are going to be created as parkland. You see where Lincoln Memorial is set up just a little bit to the north and west of there?
By the red
Yeah.
line.
Okay, so these buildings are beginning to pop up, and it affects that architectural change of the city that we talked about. Now, I also talked about a natural change, though, right? It's going to be planted by man and woman. But naturally, how has Washington, D.C. changed prior to an advent of an idea for Thomas Jefferson? We have plantings of flowering
Cherry trees.
cherry trees. Now, where do you think these cherry trees might exist that might cause a conflict with the Jefferson Memorial? They're right along the Tidal Basin, aren't they? They're all along that body of water right there. So this is going to cause people an awful lot of conflict. You planted these trees in 1912 and in years subsequent, so all the 3,020 make their way into the ground. But then a proposal for Thomas Jefferson Memorial comes along. 1935, a commission is set up. There's all kinds of planning that's going to be set aside. Funding is established. There's going to be a competition for design. And a site decision is made to place it right where that star is. Right along where all these trees are located. What could that conflict possibly be? Well, it's going to come to fruition when these two people collide. President Roosevelt, once again shown there on the right-hand side. Eleanor Patterson, a newspaper publisher from Washington, D.C., there on the opposite side. I really like bringing this up whenever I tell this story because what is she doing? Even though these photographs were not taken in the same room, it shows her looking away, doesn't it, from President Roosevelt? And really, that speaks volumes of the way that Miss Patterson felt about President Roosevelt. She didn't like him a little bit. And one of the things that she's going to stand against President Roosevelt on is the planting of a memorial where what is already planted? Flowering
Cherry trees.
Yeah. Fantastic. And there it is, another primary resource, the actual blueprints of the Jefferson Memorial, that which is laid down, overlaid by a newspaper heading. 600 trees must give way to memorial. Now, I just told you 3,020. That's 20% of all of those trees. In one way, shape, or form are going to have to be moved for the building of the Jefferson Memorial. It's going to rub an awful lot of people in a very hard way. But what is going to come to pass is something of a phenomenon that we talk about every year at cherry blossom time. This is the blueprint. Look at how everything is laid out, where cherry trees are, where the Jefferson Memorial will be. It is going to be a way that is going to draw the ire of an awful lot of people that are going to show up at the White House in November 1938. And people that show up at the White House are going to be armed with a petition. And they're going to give a petition to the Secretary of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt that wants him to stop any building of the Jefferson Memorial right there because it would affect these beautiful trees. They are even going to sing. Ranger Brad won't be. But they sang a poem to President Roosevelt's secretary called Trees. Joyce Kilmer is the poet. It goes a little bit like this. I think that I shall never see a poem lovely as a tree that looks at God all day and lifts her leafy arms to pray. It goes on. It is a story of a poem of a tree and its stately beauty and the way that it should stand for all time until it dies a natural death, not to be moved for the building of a memorial. The very next day, construction was to begin. In newspapers in Washington, D.C., we're going to have cartoons like this that are going to be mocking President Roosevelt and his building of a Jefferson Memorial. Now, what is President Roosevelt doing in this image?
Chopping a cherry tree.
Do the ladies in this picture look rather happy?
No. Those are ladies.
They look rather shocked, don't they? Now, the interesting thing is, look at the way that President Roosevelt's dressed. Can you think of someone in our past who may have dressed that way, who has a monument standing directly behind?
George Washington.
And what's the fable about George Washington? George Washington
Cut down a cherry tree.
You have a lot of stories coming together right here. In other words, the ladies and George Washington's presence in the background are kind of, in the way the cartoonist laid this out, in a way shaming President Roosevelt. So President Roosevelt has a lot to contend with. To see his memorial to Jefferson move forward, and also to make people happy on the other side of the question. There's the poem. There's the ladies.
Story.
The very next day after they deliver their petition, these ladies, who you can see are dressed for roughing it, chain themselves to the flowering Japanese cherry trees at the ground where they are about ready to turn the first spade of earth to build the Jefferson Memorial.
Are they the first tree huggers?
Oh, I would say they're
Pretty close.
Pretty close. They are going to make a stance against the removal of these trees, and President Roosevelt is going to say all of this is a flim-flam. He's going to go down and talk to these ladies. He did use that word, or words.
Okay.
He is going to go down and speak to these ladies. We do know he does this, but what I'm about to tell you, or what Ranger Jen's about to tell you, can neither be refuted nor proved, but it is a story that has passed down over time. Now, as we know, there are no skeletons in the foundation of the Jefferson Memorials. We do know the ladies unchained themselves from these trees. But the story goes like this.
It's in a book about World War II Washington, because this is just prior to. And it doesn't have any footnotes. So I don't know if this is history class or not, but this is really important when you're writing things or documenting things. You want to make sure you cite your source, because we all really want to know if this story is true or not. But it makes such a good story that we decided that we preface it by saying we're not really sure it's 100% true, but we know the ladies moved, and we know the trees got moved. The story goes that these women, as you see here, were in these positions, and FDR wanted his crew to get these ladies out of there so they could move those trees, and supposedly they gave them lots of coffee or tea to drink. And what happens after you've had a lot of coffee or tea to drink?
You gotta be crazy.
You gotta go. And so we think it's possible that might have been what motivated these women to move away from the trees and go to the bathroom. And that would then clear the way for the workmen to come in and get the trees out. Now, as I said, we don't know 100%, but it sure makes a good story, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yes.
And we know that the trees got moved. And I don't think the trees were hurt. The trees were moved.
Yeah, the most of the trees are extracted, not with the axe, but literally taken out of the ground, but displaced nevertheless, and much to the consternation of these ladies. And President Roosevelt is going to have his memorial rise. The very next year, after the clearing of the area in 1939, in the early stages of the building of Thomas Jefferson Memorial, we are going to have the laying of the cornerstone, laid by President Roosevelt. You visit Jefferson Memorial. If you come down to visit us in 2018, you'll see that cornerstone when you visit Jefferson Memorial. You think of Ranger Jen and Ranger Brad when you're there. And
Maybe we'll be there.
Maybe. But
it's pretty safe to say, is it not, that these ladies aren't so concerned with the trees as they are sticking it to President Roosevelt?
Fair balance, I would say.
You think they're really concerned about the trees?
Looking at the way they're dressed, I don't think they're necessarily thinking they're going to be in it for the long haul. Making a statement, all we are seeing right here is for sure a statement not only against the Jefferson Memorial, but as Ranger Jen said, there was everyone has enemies. No matter how loved someone is, for example, Dallas Cowboys, my favorite football team. Hey, it's a great example. For as many of the people that love them, there are more people that despise them. And perhaps what they are also doing here is just making a statement against President Roosevelt. But nevertheless, the memorial is built. And it is going to be completed even in the wake of our entrance into World War II. 1941, the United States becomes an active participant in the Second World War, and President Roosevelt wants to continue to have this building rise because, as President Lincoln had the Capitol Dome completed in the American Civil War, as he said, that is a symbol of our union and should continue to rise during this great conflict we are engaged in. President Roosevelt wanted Jefferson's memorial, basic principles in the founding of our nation embodied by this structure right here. Clearly a reflection of his home of Monticello, Charlottesville, Virginia, overlooking his creation, the University of Virginia. It will rise until formal dedication on this man's 200th birthday, April 13th, 1943. And fortunately, this story is going to have a happy ending, not only for President Roosevelt, for finally the memorial to President Jefferson is built, but the ladies who chained themselves to those trees are going to be witness that this memorial is going to be framed by more trees than what stood here originally in the first place. So it is a win-win situation, and it is a clear indication of not only how a president, but how presidents have changed the face of our country socially, naturally, and in pop culture. When you get down to it, the cherry trees are a very active part of popular culture that draw people to Washington, D.C. You'll see people with cherry tree shirts, people painting and selling cherry tree paintings in Washington, D.C. Not in the park, mind you, because you can't sell anything in the park that is not sanctioned by the Park Service. But it is a city that is awash in red, white, and pink every spring, and it is a great symbol of rebirth and renewal and friendship. And the monuments and memorials are, of course, a hearkening to another Japanese sentiment, the reverence of those who came before us. So blending together the trees and the monuments and memorials, it is a clear indication of just how important and rich our history is in a man-made and a natural sense. So with that being said, I would like to field any questions you may have. So with Ranger Jen.
Question. Never know. There's such an interesting story behind a building when you see it like this, huh?
Yeah.
Not all at once, guys.
Those cherry trees in the back?
Those are flowering Japanese cherry trees.
Yep.
This is a very popular place to take photographs right along the Tidal Basin looking toward the Jefferson Memorial. I would clearly say that Jefferson Memorial is the spot in Washington that is most identifiable in cherry tree photographs taken every springtime. The Franklin Roosevelt and Martin Luther King memorials as well, but this is kind of that classic image of Washington at cherry blossom time.
Hi, so they can see it.
Go ahead.
Will the cherry trees be blooming in the second week of June?
No,
it's usually earlier. It's end of March, early April.
It's like a flash. They come and they go. And that's one of the reasons it's so important for the people of Japan, because in the sense that the height of their beauty, the blossoms fall to the ground, it represents our brevity of life. And it reinforces the importance of life to really appreciate what you have while you're here, your loved ones, your family, the beauty of your surroundings. And I'll tell you another connection. When you visit the park, the cherry trees are still going to be there even if you visit in an off time of the year when they're not blooming. And at the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial, the memorial is festooned with these trees. And when they come into bloom in April, it's kind of a bittersweet connection between the two, because, as I mentioned to you, these trees represent the precious commodity that life is. They come into bloom at a time that coincides with the passing of Dr. Martin Luther King, where he was shot by an assassin in Memphis, Tennessee, April 4th, 1968 in Memphis, Tennessee. And 39 years old, he is taken. And when these blossoms come into bloom, it's kind of like a bittersweet reminder of a life taken before its time.
And they thought of that when they designed it in the color of the stone that they used at the Martin Luther King Memorial. So there's a lot of connections all over the park. So we'd be happy to take you around and tell you more stories when you come to visit. So anybody else have anything else they want to ask? Yeah, go ahead.
Is there a specific monument you guys work at?
Come again?
Can you say it again?
Come up here. Yeah, come up here.
Is there a specific monument you guys work at?
We get to rotate around, which makes our job pretty fun. We have what we call 8 icon sites that we mostly staff on a regular basis. The Washington Monument is one. Right now it's getting ready to be repaired. May have heard. I don't know if it's made it all the way to Montana.
The elevators on
we've
the
had some elevator issues post-earthquake, which happened here in August of 2011. And so that's been an issue. And so they've decided to shut that down until they figure it all out and can repair it. So it's Washington, it's Lincoln, Jefferson, Franklin Roosevelt, Martin Luther King, World War II, Vietnam, and Korea, the Vietnam veterans and Korean War veterans memorials. So on any given day, rangers can be stationed at one or another and get to rotate around. So in a way, it's fun because we get a lot of variety. We get to talk about a lot of different things, but we also have to know a little bit about everything. So it keeps it interesting. Really kind of neat.
Yeah, I was working here yesterday at Jefferson Memorial.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's you bounce around the different sites, and you do stuff like what Ranger Jen and I are doing today. This is what we're doing today, talking to you out there in Montana. Tomorrow I might be giving a lecture out in Virginia at a college at our learning and retirement colleagues that we have a lecture series with. We do bike tours, walking tours.
We go out to schools,
yeah.
Not usually as far out as yours, but we go out and about and do programs with groups of all ages. It's pretty fun.
Hey, sometimes you might find yourself on TV. So, yes, Flash.
Go ahead.
Who do you think the next memorial is going to be for?
Dwight David Eisenhower.
Yeah, Eisenhower's on the books right now. Has the designs finally been approved? There's been some controversy, and in fact, we could do a whole spiel about controversies. I mean, this is the controversy, obviously, with Jefferson, but all of the different memorials have had some kind of controversy, and Eisenhower's going through the design process right now. I don't know. Well, but I don't know. They kind of, in the time that I've worked on them all, there's been we don't want to clutter it up anymore with more memorials. So they keep saying we're not going to build anymore, and then we hear that something else is happening.
And when you get down to it, memorials are everywhere. I mean, Washington, D.C. is a very high-profile place for a memorial or a monument. But we have memorials all across the country, and there could conceivably be something of a national scale built for someone or some group.
The World War I is getting...
Oh, yeah, the World War I memorial. It's going to take the shape of what is a place known as Pershing Park, dedicated to the commanding general of the Army in World War I. That's going to become a national World War I memorial. So we've got a couple of things in the works.
Were built backwards in the order of the wars. So Vietnam, the most recent war, got the first memorial. So they worked backwards. And so when they got to World War I, there were no World War I veterans left to support that. And so now that's finally getting done with the, what are we, centennial of World War I?
Hey, let's get weird.
Okay, so, like, which president do you think is gonna be, which memorial from either Obama or Trump? Which one do you think they're gonna build a memorial for?
Next question.
It's a little too soon.
Way soon.
We have different.
So I have a follow-up question for when you were talking about the presidential memorials and through time. And one of the things, especially in the West, a president who's highly esteemed is Teddy Roosevelt for his land, his vision for land, obviously, with John Muir and all of that. And I've often wondered, is there anything in the works for Teddy Roosevelt as far as memorial in the National Mall?
We do have a memorial. It's not exactly on the mall, but it does exist on an island in the Potomac River, the little island known as Theodore Roosevelt Island, which has a trail that you can hike around a little bit. It's kind of a boardwalk. It takes you through the woods and things there. You've been out there?
Yeah.
And then there's a memorial right in the center. I kind of laugh. I think it looks like he's hailing a cab. He's got his arm up in the air, and but it's a big statue of Theodore Roosevelt and some of his quotes. So it's not officially part of our park. It falls under the George Washington Memorial Parkway, but there is such a place. It's not quite on the mall, but it does exist. And we do talk about him a lot as far as the, what he did for the Park Service.
Okay, I think that's it from us here.
Awesome.
So I think
thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining.
See you next year.
Yes, we hope to see you guys in DC.
Yeah, well, we'll try and be in touch.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Sure. Thank you.
Bye.